Welcome back to France 24. I'm Delano de Souza and we're live from Paris. The headlines this hour. Corruption sentences of former Brazilian President Lula da Silva annulled ahead of election schedule for 2022. The country's prosecutor general says the ruling will be appealed. Jury selection paused in the trial of a former police officer accused in the death of George Floyd. This as the judge mulls adding a third-degree murder charge. And calls for greater equality between men and women as countries around the world mark International Women's Day. A Brazil Supreme Court judge has annulled the criminal convictions against former leftist President Lula da Silva. The move restores his political rights ahead of elections scheduled for next year. The former president was convicted over graft allegations back in 2018 and released from prison in late 2019. Brazil's prosecutor general, meanwhile, says the ruling will be appealed. Earlier, I spoke to Tim Vickery in Rio de Janeiro for the latest.
This is a very complicated situation here because the merit of Lula's conviction has not been touched. What has been decided here, years after the verdict that took Lula out of the last presidential election campaign and took him to prison, what has now been decided is that the court that made that decision was not the adequate forum to judge this case. So Lula is back in the game and he regains his political rights. But one possible interpretation here is that this also protects Sérgio Moro, the judge who made the decision. That's because Sérgio Moro later became justice minister in the government of Jair Bolsonaro. So it seems he had a clear and definite interest in the election for which he had rendered Lula ineligible. And it seems from intercepted conversations that in his role as judge, he's also alleged to have been coaching the prosecution's side. So his partiality, his lack of partiality is in question. Now that's under investigation. That investigation may now be halted as a result of the decision taken today by Brazil's Supreme Court. So it's a very complicated situation. We're going through the looking glass on this one. And over the next few days, constitutional experts and lawyers in Brazil will be spending a lot of time trying to explain what has happened and what might happen now.
And Tim, how will this development today likely shape the race for the presidency next year?
Well, as it stands, Lula is back in the game. He is eligible to run as president at the end of 2022. In most of the opinion polls, he would be the leading candidate at this time, although he does have quite a strong rejection rating as well. But his legal problems are not necessarily all over. There are other cases in the pipeline. So at the moment, I think all we can say is watch this space.
Tim Vickery reporting that earlier from Rio de Janeiro. In other news, protests have broken out in the U.S. city of Minneapolis. This as a judge weighs whether to add a third-degree murder charge in Derek Chauvin's trial. Now, the former police officer is facing charges of second-degree murder and manslaughter for the death of George Floyd. Last year, Chauvin was fired from the police force after he was captured on video kneeling on Floyd's neck for nearly 8 minutes. The trial, which was scheduled to begin today, has been delayed to at least Tuesday. For more, we can go across to France 24's Ketevan Gorgestani standing by outside that courthouse in Minneapolis. Ketevan, why has jury selection been delayed today?
Well, because there's still a lot of uncertainty, even within the courthouse, even coming from the judge himself. Basically, the issue is that possible added charge, the third-degree murder charge on top of second-degree unintentional murder and second-degree manslaughter. This is a charge that the prosecution had initially requested during the preliminary hearings, and at the time, the same judge had rejected it, saying that it didn't apply to the case of Derek Chauvin. he rejected that third-degree murder charge. But then on Friday, a court of appeals here in Minneapolis ruled that the judge had to reconsider and possibly reinstate this third-degree murder charge. And that's what's led to this uncertainty starting this morning. That's what pushed the judge to tell the jury to leave the courthouse and only come back possibly this Tuesday while they were figuring out what to do. Because the question now is, can this trial and other proceedings go on even without a ruling on whether or not to keep that third-degree murder charge? The prosecution is saying that they're ready to go, but they want an answer on that third-degree murder charge. The defense says they should go ahead with the jury selection. They have time until the actual trial starts. So what they're waiting now is for the Court of Appeals to rule on who has jurisdiction to decide and whether or not they can go ahead with other proceedings, including the jury selection, while they wait for a final decision on whether or not to use that third-degree murder charge. So still a lot of uncertainty here in Minneapolis, even within the courtroom. But the judge said that he's intent at least to go ahead with possibly some of the other motions or elements on the agenda that he can go through with while they wait for that ruling from the Court of Appeals.
And Ketivan, talk us through what the atmosphere is like in the city of Minneapolis, a city that erupted in protests in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder.
Well, and that violence, of course, was fresh on everyone's mind, especially on local authorities, and they really braced themselves for possible violence. The area where I am in downtown Minneapolis, around this courthouse, you may be seeing some of those fences behind me. The whole courthouse is surrounded by fences, barbed wires, concrete blocks, and the National Guard is out in numbers to protect this area of the city. Of course, the atmosphere so far has been very calm. There was a march and a protest yesterday. Same thing earlier today when the proceeding started this morning here in Minneapolis. But everyone here was here in peace. A lot of people are actually angry at this display of security, about how much money was spent to protect buildings when they are simply asking for justice. And that was really their message. We want justice for George Floyd. This is why we are here. Some people even saying that they are hopeful that this trial might be the trial that starts bringing change in the United States as far as holding police officers accountable for the force that they use in the line of duty. But of course, this is not something that everyone agrees with. Some people say they're not hopeful at all, and they point to this display of security to say that authorities don't believe that the verdict is going to go their way, and they're bracing themselves for violence.
Ketivan, thank you very much for that. Ketivan Gojastani reporting there from Minneapolis. In other news, new guidance for fully vaccinated people in the United States. The CDC says people who are inoculated can gather indoors without a mask or social distancing. However, when outdoors, masks are still being recommended and people should continue to avoid large gatherings.
And somebody else isn't wearing a mask?
Now, over 359 people have died in the past 24 hours from COVID-19 here in France. The number of people in ICUs in the country is at its highest level since the end of November. In recent days, France has ramped up its inoculation drive, while a 6 p.m. curfew does remain in place throughout the country during the week, with a partial lockdown on weekends in certain specific regions of France. The number of new coronavirus infections dropped to a new low in the United Kingdom for the first time since September. The encouraging news comes as over 22 million people have received at least one COVID-19 vaccination. And today, school children made their way back to the classrooms after 2 months as the country moved one step closer to normality.
It's their first day back at school after 2 months of lockdown. Pupils across England have returned to their classrooms with COVID rules such as staggered arrivals and not being able to socialise with pupils outside of their defined bubble. But even so, it's a huge relief for both children and parents.
I'm excited to see my friends after this whole pandemic.
I think they need it for their mental health, for our mental health, and also, a little bit anxious to see how they're going to be because they've been at home for so long now.
Many parents have struggled for months juggling work and full-time childcare. Pupils also missed out on more than 3 months of school during Britain's first national lockdown last spring, leading to fears about the effect on their education. Secondary school pupils' return has been staggered this week as schools bring in additional requirements, such as face masks in class and regular mass testing for the first few weeks. But pupils say they're ready to put up with it.
It's not very difficult to do, and I think everyone should be okay with doing it.
Looking forward to the interaction with both pupils and staff, and also just it's easier to learn in school, I find.
The reopening of schools is the first step of the country's easing of its COVID-19 restrictions, thanks to a mass vaccination drive. Around 23 million people have received at least a first jab, helping to bring down case numbers and ease pressure on hospitals.
Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi is warning the coronavirus situation in the country is worsening. Hospitalizations are mounting as the COVID-19 death toll has now surpassed 100,000. Italy is the 7th country to reach the grim milestone following the United States, Brazil, Mexico, India, Russia, and Britain. The death toll from Sunday's blast in Equatorial Guinea has risen to 98, with at least 615 people injured. The blast on the outskirts of the economic hub Bata flattened homes, and the images from the scene resembled a war zone. The president has blamed the accident on stubble burning by local farmers and on the negligent supervision of a camp's munitions depot. A court in Senegal has released opposition leader Ousmane Sonko pending his rape trial. The case has sparked deadly protests and threatens to erode the country's reputation as one of the most stable democracies in West Africa. Sonko is seen as one of the greatest political challenges to Macky Sall ahead of elections scheduled for 2024.
Protesters gather outside the courthouse in Dakar to show their support for Ousmane Sonko. The opposition leader was released on bail on Monday after being formally charged with rape.
The proceedings are going ahead. He's going home because we don't want him to be blamed for any protests. Some have already taken place without his presence. He's understood that it's necessary to calm the situation.
Sonko's release could ease tensions after days of deadly protests in Senegal, though authorities are still anticipating further unrest, as some of his supporters vow to push ahead with planned protests. They accuse Macky Sall of being behind Sonko's arrest. Senegal's national mediator has urged the president to speak out.
We have the obligation to mark a pause. We're waiting to hear your word, and the nation is waiting for you to talk.
Protests erupted on Wednesday when Sonko was taken to court on rape charges, which the opposition believes are politically motivated. The deadly clashes were the most violent seen in years in Senegal, known for its stability. The UN, the ECOWAS regional body, and several foreign embassies have voiced concern, calling for restraint and urging authorities to take measures so that people can protest peacefully. The opposition accuses the president of unfairly targeting his political rivals in a bid to cling on to power. The crisis has also resurfaced long-standing frustrations. Protesters have denounced inequalities in Senegal, where 40% of the population lives in poverty.
Now, 3 protesters were killed in Myanmar today. Pressure on the military continuing despite heavy-handed tactics used by the junta to quell the movement. Around 200 young protesters were being blocked by the police late Monday evening. According to the United Nations, over 50 protesters have been killed since the coup last month. Outrage by Western powers has grown following the crackdown in recent weeks. The EU is preparing to widen its sanctions on the army and target businesses they run. Today is International Women's Day, a day dedicated to celebrating the social, economic and political achievements of women around the world. The 8th of March calls for speeding up the pace for gender parity. In addition to demanding equal rights, specific issues were addressed today, like in Mexico, where women said they wanted to feel safer, or in Myanmar and India, where there are calls for greater recognition in the role women are playing in ongoing protests.
Sexism is more dangerous than coronavirus. That is one of the key messages of women marching in the Philippines to mark International Women's Day.
We are gravely concerned at how women's rights issues and concerns are greatly sidelined by attacks on women through sexism, misogyny.
Meanwhile, in Mexico, women have created a memorial to victims of femicides, writing their names on a fence that was erected to protect the National Palace ahead of a planned International Women's Day march.
Pues es un manifiesto de alguna manera pacífico. Estamos pintando los nombres de todas las mujeres que han sido víctimas de feminicidio, de violación, etc., para visibilizar sus nombres.
According to government data, 939 women in Mexico were victims of femicides in 2020. In India, thousands of female farmers are highlighting the important role that they have played in protests against Modi's agricultural reforms.
और हमें लगता है कि जो औरतें हैं वो इस आबादी का आधा हिस्सा हैं और उनको अपने विचार प्रकट करने की भी आज़ादी है जो इस मंच पे मौका दिया जा रहा है और ये दिन भी अपने आप में बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है.
Despite the risks, women have also been on the front lines of Myanmar's anti-coup protests, and they are celebrating International Women's Day with defiant creativity. They have strung up sarongs known as longyi to slow the military's advance, as it is considered bad luck for men to walk underneath the garments.
For more on this story, we can bring in Sahili Franco Cipriani, member of Planeta Ella, who joins us from Caracas. Good to have you with us here on France 24. Tell us how, International Women's Day is being marked where you are.
Hi, hello, good night to you. Thanks so much for having me. So March 8th has been, quite different this year because of the COVID-19 pandemic biosecurity measures. But however, we managed to organize ourselves and we still got to go out to the streets and protest and, raise our hands and our voices, given, all the pandemic. But we ensured biosecurity measures and definitely we went out to the streets once again.
Now, I see that human rights activists in Venezuela are demanding the release of 17 women they consider political prisoners. Can you talk us through the profiles of some of these women?
Well, yes, the thing is that, we've been not only fighting due to visibility of, release of these women, but specifically of women that have been fighting for legal abortion. Actually, one of them is imprisoned currently because she tried to help a 13-year-old girl that was raped and her mom sought help. And the thing is that the rapist is out on the streets and this activist is behind bars. So we have not been only fighting, for trying to legalize abortion as a human right or trying to visibilize femicides, but also trying to visibilize and put on public agenda the huge effort we have been, trying to do, especially when we have this contradiction between the Constitution and the Penal Code. So it's not only just going to the streets and fight during March 8th, but it's a long, daily agenda we have been sustaining and holding for a long time
Indeed.
now, not only during COVID and its hardships.
Indeed. Now, can you talk me through where we are in terms of gender equality in Latin America? Because, we have had some countries that are more advanced than others. We have seen heads of state from certain countries like Argentina, like Brazil, like Chile, who have had women at the top.
Yes. So the thing is that, interestingly, Venezuela has typified 21 different types of gender-based violence, of gender-based crimes that are defined and are committed. So in terms of legal terms and penal framework, we are definitely one of the most advanced countries, not only in the Latin American region, but in the world, because Latin America has been the only continent in the world that has defined and typified femicide. But at the same time, one of the harder things we're dealing with is, trying to put that law into real action. So the thing is that we've been trying to push real articulation between the public institutions that are responsible for implementing and actually, implementing the design policies on that were designed and made under a gender perspective. So of course, we have our comrades and colleagues in Argentina that legalized abortion on December, and definitely we have been influencing each other. And I do think that we have been succeeding across the last 2 years specifically. So in Argentina, they made abortion legal, and at the same time in Venezuela we have an advanced law. But there's still a long way to go.
Indeed.
And the fight continues.
It does continue. Sahili Franco Cipriani, thank you very much for joining us on the program this evening.